Hey everybody, Trey here, back with a forecast discussion for our upcoming stretch of potentially significant severe weather across portions of the Mid-South and Southeast. For the last few days now, the SPC has outlined a 30% risk area, which is enhanced risk equivalent, in their day 4 through 8 outlook. Today is the day 4 outlook that you see right here. The 30% area extends from basically the northern half of Louisiana into much of Mississippi, the eastern half of Alabama, western Tennessee, and the southeastern Missouri area. So broad area of pretty elevated severe potential, surrounded by a 15% contour that extends all the way back to the I-35 corridor in North Texas, Dallas, Waco. You are in that 15% area. And then we go over up toward the St. Louis area, over toward Nashville, down toward Birmingham, Mobile, New Orleans, all under the gun for that 15% area. But the main risk for Tuesday, March 4th, going to be in the 30% risk area you see here, as outlined by the SPC. Definitely kicking off this severe weather season with a bang. Meteorological spring starts today, and we are starting hot here in the severe weather department. The event is expected to continue into the day on Wednesday, March 5th, 15% contour all the way up the East Coast from basically Philadelphia southward into the Carolinas, down to Georgia, far extreme northeast Florida, in that 15% risk for Wednesday. So today, as we always do in these videos several days ahead of time, we're just going to do a high level, kind of 10,000 foot view at the models. Not going to go into too many specifics yet, as there's still a little bit of discrepancy, a little bit of a few details we have to work out still, but we are getting close enough to where our main models are in range, and wanted to do a compare and contrast to kind of give a range of outcomes over what might happen here come Tuesday. Before we dive into Tuesday, I wanted to just briefly outline the threat for tomorrow across the Texas Panhandle, western Oklahoma, into far southwest Kansas. SPC has outlined a marginal risk level 1 out of 5, with a threat for a low-end risk for a tornado or two there in the 2% region from the western Texas Panhandle into northwest Texas and southwest Oklahoma, as well as some damaging winds and large hail. Just a very brief look at that right now. Here's your NAM, 12Z NAM. For tomorrow, you see this trough moving in, very compact wave ahead of our system that you see back there across the west coast. That's going to be our weather maker for our Tuesday system. But we have this little lead shortwave here, very compact, closed low aloft, and that is going to usher in some very cold temperatures aloft. Temperatures dropping down below minus 22, minus 23, minus 24 degrees Celsius here at the core of that low. So this is somewhat of a cold core type setup. Let me zoom into our southern plains sector here. So this is going to be 21Z tomorrow. Right there, the low is centered right over the Texas Panhandle. And you take a look at our surface map. We do have a little bit of a surface low that develops out here across the southern high plains. Not quite a very tight surface low by any means, which is why one of the potential limiting factors with this event tomorrow, it's not a true cold core type setup where you have a very well-defined surface low, very in close proximity to your 500 millibar closed low center. But we do have some warm temperatures, an arc of moisture that's going to be feeding up into this surface low here. And this could very well provide for a little bit of a cold core type setup out here across the marginal risk area. An arc of storms may develop out in here. Moisture definitely on the lower side, not really seeing robust moisture return at this point, and we're not expecting to see robust moisture return into tomorrow. We are expecting a morning round of storms that could moisten the environment just a little bit to give us a little bit of higher dew point values up in this marginal risk area. But if we take a quick sounding here, this is going to be at 3 p.m. Central Standard Time tomorrow. And you'll see that this is a very favorable look for a cold core type tornado setup. Limited instability overall, only about 800 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE, but that is very fat CAPE in those lowest few kilometers of the atmosphere, 0 to 3 kilometer CAPE, in excess of 160 joules per kilogram. So a lot of that instability packed in the lowest few kilometers of the atmosphere, which, as we know, helps to tilt and stretch all that vorticity near that developing surface low into the vertical to aid in tornadogenesis with these low top supercells. We do have a little bit of stronger low level shear as well, so perhaps a little bit on the stronger side for a cold core type event. So the combination of that plus the vorticity stretching from the surface in these updrafts may lead to a little bit of an enhanced tornado threat there across the western Texas Panhandle into southwest Oklahoma tomorrow. So just keep an eye out for that. Large hail a possibility as well as some damaging winds. So keep an eye out for that tomorrow in those areas. But let's go ahead and take a look. I'm going to zoom back out here on our NAM and get us back to the 500 millibar map. We're going to focus this video for the most part on our upcoming potentially significant severe weather threat starting on Monday night into Tuesday morning, through the day on Tuesday and into Wednesday, particularly across some of the portions of the Mid-South and Southeast we just mentioned on Tuesday. So as always, we're going to take a look at 3 different models here. This is our 12Z NAM, 12Z GFS, and the 6Z Euro. Unfortunately, the 12Z Euro not quite out yet on College of DuPage, so we're going to have to use the 6Z model, but for our purposes, that is going to be good enough. So let's go ahead and take a look here. We'll start again at 500 millibars. We'll go forward in time starting this morning. You can see that lead shortwave there, that compact closed low moving across the southern plains, going to be our weather maker for tomorrow's low end setup. And then you see this wave back in here across the western portion of the country. That is our next trough that will be our main system and main driving mechanism for severe storms going into the Tuesday, Wednesday timeframe. You see, it is what we call a bowling ball trough, just a very potent trough, very strong winds within the jet streak associated with this trough. Closed contour there at 500 millibars. So this is a closed circulation, and it will continue to march off into the plains as we go into the nighttime hours on Monday into Tuesday. Amplifies very significantly here into the day on Tuesday. This is just a textbook trough ejection. Very potent winds again here in the jet streak with this trough. Most of the strong flow in the exit region of the trough, the axis all the way back in here, out across Oklahoma, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas. And then you have your exit region of that trough well positioned there from the mid-south down into the southeast. Very strong kinematics. You can already tell, we haven't even looked at the low levels yet, but you can already tell that this is a very potent trough and is going to induce a very robust low-level response. Slightly negatively tilted trough, very strong flow aloft. If we go up to 250 millibars as well, the defluence aloft is maximized here across this region. Take a look at that defluence aloft. Over Missouri, winds out of the south here at 250 millibars, down here across Louisiana and Mississippi, almost due westerly. So extreme defluence aloft here, which is going to lead to a very broad area for which we're going to see ample forcing for ascent. Now, this could mean a lot of forcing for ascent, as potent as this trough is, as strong as the defluence is aloft. Going to be a lot of rising motion, a lot of forcing, and that may lead to somewhat of a messier storm mode with this event. We'll come back to that a little bit later, but first, let's go back to 500 millibars and kind of compare and contrast the models going into this system on Tuesday. So let's go to the GFS. This is the NAM here at 3 p.m. Central on Tuesday afternoon. Let's go to the GFS. We see that lead compact closed low there moving across the plains tomorrow, and then our system back across the west coast moves into the plains on Tuesday night Monday night into Tuesday morning. And you can see takes on a very amplified look, very amplified trough here. Very meridional flow in the exit region of this trough, which is, if you've heard me discuss these southeast setups before, you know that my checklist kind of includes more westerly flow aloft in these setups. That tends to lead to a bit less amplified trough, a bit less forcing, overall better chances for discrete supercells. Here, you have a lot of meridional flow in the exit region of this trough, which makes me think that our shear vectors are going to be quite parallel to any initiating boundaries that we have. Again, we're going to take a look at that here in a second. But let's take a look here at the NAM and the GFS. Here's the NAM at 21Z Tuesday. Here's the GFS 21Z Tuesday. You can clearly see the difference, that the GFS is very much more progressive than the NAM is. The NAM has all the forcing out here a little bit shifted farther east out across, we go into the kind of the southern portions of the Midwest, the Mid-South, Kentucky, Tennessee, down into Mississippi and Alabama, whereas the NAM is a little bit farther back to the west, the exit region all the way back in here, western Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, East Texas even, down into Mississippi. So there's a clear, still some clear discrepancy among the operational models this morning, particularly among the NAM and GFS. GFS, this is one of its typical biases. It tends to be a little bit too progressive at times, but definitely something to note here that we do still have some timing differences among the models so far with this setup. But the idea is overall the same. Strongly negatively tilted trough, very potent kinematics associated with this trough with a lot of forcing in that exit region, with a broad exit region to support a broad area of severe threat. Hence why the SPC outlook is so broad here, with overall severe probabilities from the southern portions of the Midwest down all the way to the Gulf Coast, because we have such a broad exit region with this trough, broad area of forcing for ascent. And so that means an opportunity over a broad area for severe storms. Let's take a look at the European model here. So again, there's our lead little shortwave moving across the plains tomorrow. Big old trough coming in out into the plains Tuesday morning. And here we are, 21Z Tuesday. Can already tell this is closer to the NAM solution, a lot less progressive than the GFS. We take a look at the NAM and the European model. European model maybe even slightly less progressive than the NAM, and certainly much different than the GFS. So we have the NAM and the European model definitely with a little bit of a less progressive solution. That may actually keep a little bit more westerly flow over the warm sector here to provide for perhaps a little bit less messy of a system. I still think, though, with such strong forcing aloft that we're going to see a lot of convective coverage with this scenario, maybe leading to messy storm modes. But here we may have a little bit more opportunity for a longer window for a less messy storm mode with slightly more westerly flow over much of the warm sector, whereas the GFS, very progressive, starts to really get that more meridional flow over the warm sector there earlier on in the event. So 21Z NAM, or 21Z on the NAM, GFS, and Euro model. Certainly the story is the same with a strong negatively tilted trough and very strong winds associated with that trough, but the GFS certainly the most progressive of the two. Would tend to side a little bit more with the NAM and the European model. GFS does tend to be quite a bit too progressive in these scenarios, so that might shift the overall area back a little bit farther to the west, back into East Texas, into eastern Oklahoma, which is why that 15% all the way back there from the SPC as well. So very potent trough here. Again, let's go up to 250 millibars. We won't go through the whole progression here, but this is 21Z on Tuesday on all of our models here, and you'll see that the story is going to be similar. Timing again is going to be a little bit different, but here's the NAM. Extremely strong defluence aloft in the exit region of this trough at 250 millibars. GFS, much of the same, not really any difference in the overall defluence. It's just the placement of where the strongest forcing is going to be a little bit farther off to the east with the GFS compared to the other models. Here's the European models, and you can see just a very, very impressive look there with this trough. And kind of the fire hose here with this jet streak aimed right in this vicinity here, far east Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Mississippi. That's going to be right in the exit region. If we were to draw out this jet streak, fairly, not really all that curved of a jet streak here, the axis right in there. We draw that in. There's your left exit region right over northeast Texas, Louisiana, into Arkansas and Mississippi. So that's why that region in particular appears to be the where ingredients are going to maximize, especially as far as forcing goes, and perhaps deep layer shear for a more robust, significant, severe threat. Right exit region, don't rule that out as well. Southern portions of the risk area, southern Louisiana, east Texas, southern Mississippi. You can still get plenty of storm development in the right exit region. So. But just keep that in mind that the left exit region here is going to be right in there, which is our favored quadrant for severe weather. And that's why one of the reasons why that risk is a little bit farther off to the north than it was, at least initially in this setup. But very, very impressive trough here. Extremely impressive overall. And that's why the threat for severe weather is definitely elevated to a significant level with this setup. All right, let's back it up here on all of our models, and we're going to take a look at the surface here, see how the surface progresses, as that is going to be critical here. And just at my brief glance I've taken at the models here before this video to help me kind of prepare for what to say, there are some potential flies in the ointment with this setup, and they have to do with the progression of the surface. So this is going to be pretty critical here. We'll zoom in here to our southern plains sector on all of these. It's going to give us a little bit of a closer view here, since our activity is going to be focused more in the southern U.S. This is going to give us a little bit of a better view here. So let's go ahead and start off here. This is going to start off again. This is the NAM this morning. We go on with time. We're going to see surface low development tomorrow as that trough aloft moves in. Broad surface low there across northeast New Mexico into the Texas Panhandle, helping out with our cold core setup tomorrow. That low kind of moves off. But notice here, this is one of the critical things with this setup, which is why we're going to see perhaps a pretty far northward advance of moisture with this setup. It's because this is kind of a lead wave for us. So this initial compact shortwave aloft, that's going to be our main driver for severe weather tomorrow on Sunday. That is going to be a lead wave. You see here this surface low develops, winds out of the south, and that's going to start bringing in moisture fairly early on, again, a couple of days ahead of time of our Tuesday setup. It's going to start the moisture return process already. So we're already going to have moisture streaming into the region here a couple days in advance, and we're not going to have a very robust cold front with this particular surface low. So that moisture is not going to get swept all the way out into the Gulf. So we're already going to have, this is Monday morning, already going to have a well-defined warm sector in place, not going to be unstable enough for storms on Monday. It's going to be well ahead of the trough ejection. But as we go into Tuesday, that's already going to be in place. So it's not going to take much to get that warm sector northward into the region. And therefore, we're going to be able to get moisture fairly far north in this setup. Now, how wide that warm sector is with northward extent is going to be critical, but it does appear like we're going to have robust moisture already in place ahead of time with this setup. You can see surface low development here. I'll zoom back out to our central plains sector. It looks like our surface low tries to start developing there Monday evening. This is 21Z Monday, so Monday afternoon actually, up there in eastern Colorado. The surface low starts to develop. Very strong surface low, going to be very windy with this system. Very tight pressure gradient on Monday. So strong winds across the central and southern plains. Then we go into Tuesday. You can see that we have kind of a dry line, kind of a temperature gradient there, dry line / Pacific frontal boundary stretching down from the surface low. That cold front starts to push off to the east a little bit going into the day. Actually, it looks to be somewhat of a dry line type, pseudo dry line, I would suspect here. Let me zoom out real quick, just draw in our features. So the surface low centered up here in Kansas. Looks like we have a clear pressure tongue in here. So this does actually look to be the cold front here. It does look to be the cold front. I don't see anything back in here that would indicate that there's a secondary frontal boundary there, perhaps initially before it catches up to the moisture, but that looks to be somewhat of a dry line / Pacific front, we'll call it, associated with the cold front with this system. So cold front comes through Tuesday morning, starts pushing off to the east, and that is going to be our kind of main initiating boundary for storms in this setup. So I'll zoom back out here once again. So this is going to be 21Z, surface low up here into the Kansas City area with the cold front stretching down in here somewhere. See here it looks like a little bit more of your actual synoptic cold front. So this may be a little bit more of a dry line / Pacific front deal here now that I look at it a little bit more closely here as we go into the day on Tuesday. So surface low again up here in northwest Missouri. Perhaps a little Pacific front / dry line down in there. And then we have our main cold front back in here with our main temperature gradient back through that western pressure tongue there. So that's 21Z Tuesday on the NAM. Let's go to the GFS here. I'll back it out once again for us. So let's go forward in time. See our surface low developing tomorrow in the Texas Panhandle for our cold core setup tomorrow afternoon. We go forward, that low kind of washes out. Surface low development once again Monday afternoon. Not all that surprising, same spot as the NAM, and that quickly deepens and moves off to the east. And then we go into Tuesday. So interestingly, despite the timing differences between the NAM and the GFS with the upper pattern, the surface low is actually in a very similar spot up here into northwest Missouri. We have what appears to be our Pacific front / dry line, and then our main synoptic cold front appears to be back in this region here. So zooming in a little bit more closely, you see why the area of interest is a little bit farther off to the east. Despite a similar placement of the surface low, you see here at 21Z, our main sort of pressure tongue out here, sort of with that Pacific front / dry line out in here, all the way into western Mississippi at 21Z, whereas on the NAM, it was clearly a little bit farther back to the west. You see here that lead pressure tongue kind of right in here. So clearly some timing differences at the surface as well between the NAM and the GFS, but overall the idea is the same. So again, that Pacific front dry line deal should be our main initiating boundary for storms as it pushes through the southeast on Tuesday. How about the Euro? Let's take a look at the Euro here real quick. I'll just keep it on here just since we have already had a good idea. Surface low development on Monday afternoon, eastern Colorado. You see a little bit farther south than the other two models, more southeast Colorado, southwest Kansas going into Monday evening. But overall, the idea is the same, deepens pretty quickly. And so there you go. There is our kind of prefrontal cold front still developing back in here. Pacific front / dry line right in there through that pressure tongue. And my 21Z looks to be right out in here, out across portions of the Mid-South and Southeast, quite a bit farther back to the west. So that is certainly going to be something to watch where this boundary sets up, as this is going to be likely our initiating boundary for storms with this setup. And you can see here very quickly through our initiating boundary, the shape's going to be the same, so we'll leave that up, but our shear vectors, you can see quite a good deal parallel to the initiating boundary. Perhaps with northward extent, we may start to get a little bit more perpendicular to the initiating boundary. And we'll talk about this setup potentially up in here in just a second on the surface low. That could be an area to watch as well. Could be some more discrete storms there. But down here in the main region, looks to be a little bit more, especially with southern extent, a little bit more of a parallel nature between the surface boundary and our shear vectors in the deep layer, which could lead to, along with that very strong forcing, to a pretty quick transition to a linear, more messy storm mode. Up here to the north again, if we have enough warm sector up here, a little bit more perpendicularity between those two, and so that could lead to a slightly more favorable storm mode up with northward extent, but again, that's going to depend on the width of the warm sector. Speaking of the width of the warm sector, let's go back and look at our moisture. So we'll keep it on the southern plains sector, and we'll switch it back to our dew point, switch it back to today, and then our dew point map here. So again, we'll start off with the NAM. Those dew points starting this morning, well off into the Gulf at this point, but as we go into tomorrow, very quick transport of moisture northward. Again, not a ton of moisture making its way all that far north, but enough to support a severe threat up there in the Texas Panhandle into western Oklahoma tomorrow. Those 60s dew points, you see, they're starting to push northward into Texas. And again, this is just Sunday evening, 2 days before our event. 60s already making their way inland pretty decently here. And then that continues into Monday, 60s dew points into central Oklahoma by Monday evening. Again, not going to have enough forcing to really initiate storms during the day on Monday. Going into the nighttime hours and early morning hours on Tuesday, that moisture will be in place. We'll start to get a little bit of that forcing making its way in. So that could allow for some storms to develop early Tuesday morning, and that means a fairly early initiation of the severe threat across these regions. So you see that those 60s dew points on the NAM by 12Z Tuesday, so 6 a.m. Tuesday morning, all the way up into northeast Oklahoma there, with a very well-defined dry line / Pacific front right in here, out across central Texas northward into central Oklahoma. Severe threat will be east of that in the warm sector. Interestingly, however, though, look at the narrowness of the warm sector up here. That is a main concern with northward extent in this setup, away from the surface low. Down here across the southern portions of the risk area, very broad warm sector, lots of real estate for robust severe weather. Up here to the north, though, much more narrow. And as we go into the day on Tuesday, that really persists. Interestingly, we don't get a ton of more robust moisture return up to the north out here into places like Arkansas, Missouri, Illinois, eastern Kansas. So the 60s dew points through the day, 21Z here, basically just north of I-40 up into the Ozarks there of Arkansas and southward. And you see the kind of triangular look of the warm sector on the NAM, at least where the 60s dew points are, very narrow with northward extent, meaning not a lot of real estate for there to be any prefrontal supercells in this environment. Even down to the south, we kind of lose some of that width of the warm sector down there. Overall, it is wider, so there is some potential, a little bit greater potential down here for perhaps some prefrontal supercells in confluence bands out ahead of the main frontal zone back in here. But overall, not all that wide of a warm sector, so not going to provide a ton of opportunity for there to be robust prefrontal supercells in this environment. That is certainly a good thing. With these kinematics, we'll take a look at the kinematics in a second. With these kinematics, that would certainly favor significant tornadoes. And even if we don't get supercells, more discrete supercells, there will be a chance for some significant tornadoes within the line because of the kinematics at work. So that's 21Z Tuesday. Let's compare that to the GFS. So here we go, that moisture return underway tomorrow. We continue into Monday morning, very similar look. A little bit worse, though, the 60s dew points pretty much just down here across I-40 southward into southeast Oklahoma, western Arkansas, and southward. And then as we go into the day, again, the GFS a lot more progressive than the other two models. I think this is definitely overdoing the degree of how progressive this is. The cold front's all the way over here with almost no warm sector inland north of central Mississippi, which I don't think that's going to be the case. I would tend to side more so with the NAM run here than the GFS. So for now, we'll just keep the GFS as an outlier. Let's take a look at the Euro model, which was more in line with what the NAM was showing. Moisture return starts tomorrow. We go into Tuesday morning, very similar look among the NAM and the Euro, with the 60s dew points up to basically the I-44 corridor there in northeast Oklahoma, up toward the Tulsa area. Then as we go forward with time, very similar picture to the NAM. Not a ton of northward advance, really, with those 60s dew points all the way up really far north into Missouri, Illinois, eastern Kansas, places like that. And a more pinched off, more triangular shaped warm sector down here to the south. Again, down here with southern extent, a little bit less forcing, a little bit more westerly flow aloft, more perpendicular shear vectors with respect to the initiating boundary. a little bit more of a glancing blow from the trough, and wider warm sector could mean some more discrete supercell activity down here closer to the coast, southern Louisiana, southeast Texas, southern Mississippi. But overall, with northward extent, that warm sector is very pinched off and not going to leave a lot to be desired as far as real estate goes for robust prefrontal supercell development. And then that continues. That warm sector just gets shunted farther and farther southeast going into Wednesday morning. So that has been the main thing with this setup. If we go a couple of days ago, let's take a look at the run a couple days ago. We'll go to 12Z on the 27th. Just very curious here about what it was looking like. And you see much broader warm sector with northward extent a few days ago, and we've trended towards such, perhaps with a little bit more meridional flow aloft. Changes in the geometry of the low-level response. That has led to a much more pinched off warm sector, much more warm sector shunted farther south. So that's some good news with this setup for the folks in this region. The environment, though, will be favorable, very favorable for significant severe weather. Let's take a look at a couple soundings here. I want to take some soundings out across the warm sector here. We'll take one at 21Z. We'll start at 18Z, actually, southwest Arkansas. So this is going to be at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, or noon Central Standard Time. Then we'll take one Texas-Louisiana border there. So again, the severe threat could start as early Tuesday morning out across parts of Texas into southeast Oklahoma, but we'll really start to ramp things up during the day as the front shifts east, front/dry line shifts east. Look at this profile here. Instability, decent, 1,300 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE. It is a little bit on the skinny side, very saturated low levels here. Not all that uncommon for these southeast setups. We have plenty of instability for robust updrafts. But what I want you to look at is the wind profile. This wind profile is frankly quite insane. Look at how much curvature we have in the hodograph here. That is due to very significant veering and strengthening of the winds with height. We go from 15 knots out of the south surface here to 65 knots out of the southwest at 850 millibars. That is very impressive veering and strengthening of those winds with height, leading to extreme curvature in the low levels of the hodograph and very strong low-level shear. Look at this, 47 knots of 0 to 1 kilometer shear. That is insane low-level shear. And effective storm relative helicity, almost 650 meters squared per second squared. And this is at 18Z, mind you, so the environment will certainly be favorable, at least kinematically, very early on in this event. So any storms that are ongoing will have the potential to produce significant damaging winds as these very strong winds are transferred to the surface through downdrafts, as well as tornadoes, perhaps some significant. Even if we just have a squall line and no discrete prefrontal supercells, the squall line very well may have a pretty high chance of producing significant tornadoes just simply because of the low-level shear is being off the charts in this environment. Now, if we were to look at our shear vectors, 0 to 3 kilometer shear vectors, and the orientation of the line should be something kind of like that, we do have a decent degree of perpendicularity with the line. This tells us how likely it is for there to be little kinks that develop in the line that are little mesovortices that can produce tornadoes. And we do have a decent amount of perpendicularity here, not perfect, but enough to support a tornado risk within the line. And with this much low-level shear, any spin-up tornadoes within the line, they may be brief, but they may be very strong as well. And so, yeah, it would be EF2 plus tornadoes, even within the squall line if any were to develop. So this is going to be our Texas-Louisiana border sounding, so down there. And then this is a little bit farther north into Arkansas. Not quite as favorable of a wind profile here farther north. Plenty of instability up here, but again, the warm sector is more narrow up here toward Arkansas. Looks like the core of your low-level jet is going to be a little bit farther south out across this area of East Texas into Louisiana, as opposed to up here farther to the north. So let's go forward with time here on the NAM. So 21Z, we'll take one up here, kind of in the Little Rock vicinity, and then one down here, central Louisiana, closer to Alexandria. So this is going to be up in Arkansas. So not quite as favorable of a profile up here, at least kinematically, for significant tornadoes. This would be more of a damaging wind threat up here. Still enough. Yeah, actually, I'm not sure about tornado threat up here farther to the north. It looks like your low-level jet core is certainly farther to the south. Let's see on the 850 millibar map. And it looks like the 850 millibar map might almost outrun the front a little bit, so it'll be displaced in the warm sector just a little bit compared to where the actual front is located. So the storms along the front, especially with northward extent up here where the low-level jet's a little weaker, may not have enough low-level shear to produce significant tornadoes, but certainly down here a little bit farther to the east, to the south, out across central Louisiana into Mississippi. There definitely looks to be a significant tornado threat, even if the mode is linear, with plenty of instability, 1,700 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE, and very strong low-level shear. It's come down some as the winds veer with the frontal passage as the front and dry line approaches to more of a southwesterly direction, but still more than adequate low-level shear to support significant tornadoes going into the afternoon on Tuesday. Then we go in towards 0Z. That low-level jet continues to ramp up here. Again, we're not going to look at the GFS too much. It appears to be too much of an outlier, and the NAM stops here. So that's going to kind of be the extent of this forecast for now. Again, I didn't want to get too deep into the details yet. We'll get a little bit more information, clear up a little bit more of this model discrepancy as we go into the next few days. But it certainly looks to be a significant event on tap for these portions of the Mid-South and Southeast. I did want to look at a potential secondary area that could be of note here with this setup, and that is up directly on the surface low up here. As we talked about, it does not look like we're going to see robust moisture advection all the way up into regions up here on the surface low, but things are setting up here, at least on the NAM, for a potential secondary area of severe weather in a very cold core type setup up here on the surface low. You see we have low to mid 50s dew points and a little bit of an arc out here from northeast Kansas into western Missouri. This is 21Z Tuesday, so 3 p.m. Tuesday. You see that we have that arc kind of continuing through the afternoon and early evening into these areas. If we take a look here, so this is going to be our 500 millibar, the center of our 500 millibar map, and you see those grays there. Those are our very cold temperatures aloft. Negative 24, negative 26 degrees Celsius, negative 27 degrees Celsius. That is extremely cold air aloft, starting to overspread these areas by midday or so out here where that arc of moisture was at the surface. So 21Z, our 500 millibar closed low center is right there in northern Kansas. Surface low center just off to the east a little bit there in the Kansas City area. This is a very classic cold core type setup where you have your closed 500 millibar low with very cold temperatures aloft centered in close proximity to your surface low, which is just off to the east. And so I'm definitely eyeing this area as well for a cold core tornado potential up here going into the afternoon on Tuesday. Arc of moisture feeding up into there ahead of this kind of pseudo dry line Pacific front. Your warm frontal zone going to be somewhere in here. So right at the intersection, right along the warm front there, near and just east of the surface low center is going to be your favorite area right in that arc of better moisture right in there. Going to be very strong surface vorticity near the surface low here, near those boundaries. If we take a sounding at 21Z on Tuesday, so 3 p.m. Central on Tuesday, this is a pretty favorable look for a cold core type event. Very strong instability here, packed all the way in the lowest few kilometers of the atmosphere. So only 1,000 joules per kilogram of mixed layer CAPE, but look at our 3 CAPE. 221 joules per kilogram of 0 to 3 kilometer CAPE. Very fat instability in the low levels of the environment. Even though we don't have much low-level shear at all with these photographs, this much low-level instability is bound to assist in perhaps tilting and stretching that surface vorticity near the low and boundaries into the vertical to aid in tornadogenesis in those supercells. So we're going to have to watch that area closely for some cold core tornado potential there. Certainly large hail would be a threat with storms up here along the surface low with those very steep lapse rates aloft in excess, approaching 9 degrees Celsius per kilometer. Very steep lapse rates aloft, very fat instability near the freezing level. So that should provide for some large hail with an outside chance of a few tornadoes there if that vorticity stretching does take place. So aside from our strong kinematics down to the south, very thermodynamically driven up here along the surface low, and that is certainly going to be an area to watch on Tuesday. So that's going to wrap things up for this initial video. Again, we'll be back as needed over the next few days as we get some more updates, as that discrepancy in the models comes down a little bit, and as we get to see a little bit clearer picture of what's going to happen on Tuesday. So for now, the SPC has the greatest severe weather risk area on Tuesday in the orange shaded region here. That is a level 3 out of 5 enhanced risk equivalent from basically central Louisiana northward into much of Mississippi, Arkansas, western Tennessee, southeast Missouri. I suspect that we may see a southward trimming of the severe probabilities here. They may trim off the northern extent of this 30% area, maybe shift it south a little bit to look maybe something like this going into the next few outlook cycles, given that we have a little bit more of a pinched warm sector with northward extent, less instability, less real estate for there to be severe storms up here, with the greatest low-level jet down here to the south and widest warm sector down here to the south as well. So would not be surprised to see some more shifts in the outlook lines going forward in the next few outlook cycles, but overall a broad area of severe threat does exist for Tuesday. I would not be surprised to see them extend the risk up here as well into eastern Kansas, western and northwest Missouri, with that potential cold core threat that will have to be watched closely. If not for tornadoes, certainly for large hail. So once we get the day 3 outlook, I suspect we'll see at least a level 1 or 2 out of 5 up here into that area of eastern Kansas and western Missouri. But the main threat for significant severe weather going to be down here across the orange shaded region, where we have the strongest kinematics, strongest instability, and the potential for the most storm coverage. Looks to be mostly a squall line type event at this point, with so much forcing aloft and very dry line / front perpendicular or parallel shear vectors. Just going to be a lot of storms competing for ingredients here, and that usually leads to a squall line. The chance for prefrontal supercells looks to be greatest down here across southern portions of Louisiana and Mississippi into southeast Texas, so that'll have to be watched closely if we can get any confluence bands out here in the open warm sector. The kinematics will certainly be favorable for significant tornadoes, but overall I think mostly this looks to be a squall line type event here coming up on Tuesday, and then the threat shifts into Wednesday. A little bit too much discrepancy now to really go into detail on Wednesday, but folks along the eastern seaboard from Baltimore, Washington, D.C., southward through the Carolinas into Georgia need to be on alert on Wednesday as the threat shifts off to the east. So again, we'll be back with more updates as needed as this setup approaches. Have those safety plans in place and ready to go now so that you're not scrambling on severe weather day, the day of our outbreak, and you'll be good to go. But for now, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.